I'm Sue Thomas, President of City Club, and I welcome you all. Those of you here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Thank you for joining City Club today on Friday, February 26th for this week's Friday Forum. Today we will learn about the 2010 census, but first a few announcements. In consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our television and radio audiences, I ask that anyone that has not already done so to please silence your cell phones now. As always, we offer our appreciation to our corporate sponsors, without whose generous support these time-honored City Club luncheons would not be possible. Please join me in offering a round of applause to our winter quarter sponsors, Stoll Reeves, the Standard, and West Coast Bank. We greatly appreciate your support. One of the ways City Club offers unique opportunities to get involved in our community is through our research program. As many of you probably know, yesterday City Club released its comprehensive research report entitled Moving Forward, A Better Way to Govern Regional Transportation. This report evaluated whether the transportation governance structure in the greater Portland region is adequate for tackling the challenges of population growth, aging infrastructure, and climate change. On Wednesday, March 3rd, join City Club for a town hall-style event where members of the research committee will present their work and answer questions. The larger membership debate and vote on this report will occur Friday, March 5th, immediately preceding the day's forum. At next week's Friday Forum, reporter Betsy Hammond from the Oregonian will interview Portland Public Schools Superintendent Carol Smith about the upcoming high school redesign. And now on to today's program. The 2010 census will determine Oregon's share of more than $400 billion in federal funds for schools, hospitals, job training, and more. Census data also provides facts that help with research and advocacy on topics ranging from disease prevention to disaster preparedness. Today we will hear about how the census count directly impacts Oregon's federal funding and congressional representation, how it gives local government an accurate picture of who lives in our community and their needs, and why it is so critical that everyone be counted. Our first and third speaker today will be Multnomah County Commissioner Deborah Kafoury. As the District 1 Commissioner, Deborah is currently working on issues surrounding affordable housing and homelessness, multimodal transportation, and the 2010 census. She served as Oregon State Representative from North and Northeast Portland from 1991 to 2004, and House Democratic Leader from 2001 to 2003. Deborah is Vice Chair of the Dunaway Elementary School Foundation and serves on the Advisory Board for Reach Community Development. In addition to her current volunteer work, she spent 12 years as Board of Directors for Transition Projects, Inc. Today's second speaker is Michael Burns, the Deputy Regional Director for the 2010 census. He held this position for both the 2000 and 1990 census, and currently oversees the more than 85,000 employees who make the count happen in Northern California, Idaho, Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. Michael was born and raised in Pennsylvania and received his bachelor's degree at LaSalle University in Philadelphia. He attended graduate school at the Universities of Dallas and Texas, where he studied international business management. And our final speaker today will be Marc Levy, President and CEO of the United Way of the Columbia-Willamette. Before assuming this position in 2008, Marc served as Chief Executive Officer at United Way of the Greater Dayton area in Ohio. There he was named one of the top 3 influential leaders in philanthropy by the Dayton Business Journal. He currently chairs the United Way of America Inclusion Council and the NAACP Freedom Fund Committee. Before starting his career in nonprofit leadership, he worked as an assistant professor at the University of Oregon and held positions in the State of Oregon Mental Health Department. And so without further ado, please help me welcome today's first speaker, Deborah Kafoury.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the City Club of Portland for this Friday forum on the census, and I also want to thank all the audience members here and those who are listening for your interest in this important topic. When compared to some of the debates that are raging at the federal, state, and local level, healthcare, kicker reform, the economy, The 2010 census probably doesn't even crack your top 10 issues of concern. Well, we're here to tell you why the census is critical for our community, why we've chosen to invest our time and energy in this effort, why you should make sure and turn your census form in this spring, and why we're going to ask you to encourage your friends and your coworkers to do the same. Let's start with the basics. What is a census? It's a count of every single person in our population every 10 years. It's mandatory, and it's in the Constitution. The first census occurred in 1790 after the American Revolution, and there were 3.9 million people living in our country. This year, the count is expected to be more than 300 million. The last census occurred in the year 2000. So take a moment and think back 10 years ago. Reality TV was just ramping up. Big Brother and Survivor premiered on television. George W. was kicking off his campaign for the president. The Dow Jones was breaking records on the good side. I was a state representative, and the Democrats were in the minority. And September 11th was just the day after September 10th. The world has changed a lot, and so has our community. So I'm here to give you my top 5 reasons why the census is important to all of us this year. Number 1, the census is the foundation of our democracy. Every person in our country is counted. It doesn't matter if you can vote, how old you are, your age, whether you were born here, or the color of your skin. You count. Number 2, the census quantifies who we are. How many of us are there? What do we look like? How old are we? And what part of the county do we live? On Tuesday, the Board of County Commissioners had a 2-hour briefing on the changing demographics in Multnomah County. 2 hours of census data painted a very clear picture of the gentrification that's occurring in North and Northeast Portland and the way poverty in our county is moving east. This data will have a real impact on how and where we deliver services. Number 3, the census influences community and economic planning. Census data guides and informs both private and public sector planning in decisions like where to build new schools, roads, health centers, services for the elderly, job training centers, and more. Standard Insurance, one of our partners in this effort, uses census data for market research. The Northwest Health Foundation uses the census data to help determine where to focus their investments. Providence, Kaiser, and Legacy need the census data to ensure that they are meeting the health needs of our community. Just 2 weeks ago, Multnomah County Chair Ted Wheeler shared with this group that the county is opening a new health clinic in Rockwood in mid-Multnomah County. This decision was predominantly driven by census data. Number 4, the census determines federal and state funding. The census survey, as you heard, will help determine how the federal government distributes over $400 billion annually. And for every 100 people not counted, Multnomah County will lose $1.2 million over the next decade. That means $12,000 for every person missed over the next 10 years. Let me repeat that. We will miss out on $12,000 over the next 10 years for each person not counted. Those most likely to be missed have traditionally included communities of color, non-English speakers, those who are low income, those who are homeless, immigrants, and males of all backgrounds, ages 18 to 29. In fact, those who are most likely to be missed are those for whom the services that government provides are arguably the most important. Here's an example. Portland's street count in January 2009 estimated 1,600 people living on our streets. Not counting this group would cost Multnomah County $18 million over the next decade. Number 5, the census impacts Oregon's representation in Congress. Oregon is on the edge of gaining the 6th congressional seat. While the estimates on which state is in the top, Oregon is definitely in the running. An additional seat would give Oregon more power and a larger role in national decisions that affect us every day. With Multnomah County comprising 20% of Oregon's population, Making a concerted effort to increase our count in Multnomah County can help put Oregon over the top. Making sure that everyone counted is a no-brainer. It's a win-win situation. It's mom, pop, and apple pie. Even the city and the county can work together on this issue. And with that, I would like to introduce my co-chair of the Complete Count Committee, City Commissioner Nick Fish. So when you get your form in the mail in March, why should you mail it back in? Because it makes damn good census. We sometimes have a little time on our hands in the Census Committee room. I'd like to now turn it over to Michael Burns, who joins us from the Census Regional Office in Seattle. Michael has been doing this work for years. Actually, he's been doing it for decades, and he will provide us with some background on how the census is going to work in Oregon. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Now, I always start the presentation off just to let you know is that I used to teach. So if you look down, I will definitely call you, okay? So first of all, I want to thank Deborah for the excellent words that she said and why the census is so important. When you look at the census, this is my fourth census, and I do it because I have a passion for the census, because I have seen what happens to communities who do not get an accurate count. Back in 1990, we had an Alaska Native village that decided they were not going to participate in the census. And guess what happened? All their funding dried up for their village. Not only for 1 year, but for a 10-year period. So what I want to do is maybe relate to you why the census is so important, throw in a little bit of history, but also tell you how we're going to go about and actually get the census done. So let's go back. Last census, we had about 3.3 million people here in the state of Oregon. And our 2008 estimate with the American Population Survey, which is the survey that now collects the meats and potatoes of the census, the long-form data, the population estimate is about 3.7 million. Now, I'm a statistician. I have to throw out some numbers to you. Now, the first three things I want you to remember, and I'm going to talk about these a little bit later on, is that the census is safe, easy, and important. Now, as Deborah was saying, constitutionally, we are based that we must go ahead and do a census every 10 years. Thomas Jefferson was the first one who did the census back in 1790, and as Deborah mentioned, they said they had 3.9 million people in this country at that particular time. The thing that's amazing about it, it took them 9 years to tabulate all the data for the redistricting files and the apportionment files. Now we can do it in about 5 or 6 months. It's amazing with computers. Okay, when you think of what was happening back in 200 years ago with the Founding Fathers, when they actually went and wrote the Constitution, they made sure to say that we're going to be a representative democracy. And that's Section 1, Article 1, Section 2, then went in to say how we're going to be actually doing the census, and that is that we're going to count all residents in this country. Now, I mentioned that, okay? All residents, not just the citizens of this country, but also the non-citizen. So counting all residents, citizens and non-citizens, is an American tradition, which we've been doing for over 220 years. You might say to yourself, why would we count non-citizens? Well, let's go back. Everybody in this room, unless you're an American Indian or Alaska Native, come from immigrant stock. We all do. So one of the things I want to stress is back then, it was important to understand that even at that particular time, 220 years ago, we had about 35 to 40% of the households speaking a language other than English, and believe it or not, that language was German. When the Constitution was released, it was released in 2 languages, English and German, and a little known fact, we all might have been speaking German today because German lost to English by 1 vote in the Continental Congress as the language that we were going to use in this country. That close. Which is fine. I used to live in Germany for 2 years, so I speak it fairly well. Okay, let's fast forward back to today. We have about 310 million people in this country. And you might say to yourself, now how in the world we're going to count them all? Well, we have a very, very good foundation already started here. We have 5 offices. We have one in Portland, Beaverton, Salem, Eugene, and Redmond. In fact, I'm going to just recognize someone here today. That's Dick Lightfoot. Dick, if you can raise your hand. He's our local census office manager for here in Portland. So if you don't like something that happens in the census, that's the guy to go after, okay? All right. Now, we're also ready to start the census. We have our census takers. Again, we're going to be the major employer, one of the major employers in the state. We're going to hire about 10,000 people throughout the state. We already have tested 35,000 people, and we hold a public trust. So that 35,000 people that we tested to take census jobs, we also do background checks. So when they come and knock on your door, God forbid if you don't send back the census form, because we will come out and knock on your door, they already received their background check, their FBI clearance, so that they actually could work for the census. So we hold that public trust and we take it very, very seriously. Now, let's talk about the census. What can you expect? How many of you here have ever read Shakespeare? Okay, yes, all right. I want you to remember this, the Ides of March, okay? So about most of the state here, about 98% of the state will receive their census questionnaire in the mail right around March 15th. We're asking everybody to fill that out. It's extremely, extremely important that you do this and get it back in the mail to us. Why? Because it makes my job easier, okay? We don't have to go knock on doors. But more importantly, for every 1% nationally that we receive those census questionnaires completed and sent back in the mail, we save the taxpayers $85 million. It's amazing when you look at it. The other thing that you're going to hear about, too, is when we have our census questionnaires going out to different communities, we also know one of our biggest obstacles in the census is getting the word out to the new arrivals to this country. Imagine if you're coming here from Southeast Asia, and by the way, Oregon, for example, 10% of the population is foreign-born. When you go ahead and look at other places around the country, such as San Francisco, over 65% of the residents in San Francisco are foreign-born. So we have to get the message out, but we also have to get the message out with someone that's a trusted leader in that community. If Mike Burns goes out to the Chinese community here in Portland, I'm going to get this blank look. I already know that. I know because I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood in Philadelphia, an Italian neighborhood. However, if you switch into the language when you're talking to people, a lot of those fears that they have about government because they're here new, or that they're afraid something might happen, really dissipate very quickly when you switch into language. So one of the things that we have done an excellent job about is that we have recruited people from the neighborhoods to actually be the census takers in their neighborhoods. That way we're matching the culture and also the language of that particular neighborhood so that our census workforce that goes and knocks on doors will receive a good reception. Now, when you do a census, imagine this. Everybody here in this room comes from different walks of life. Do not think of a census as a moving picture. Think of it as a snapshot of what we look like at any one point in time on April 1st, 2010. It's also, when you do a census, it's a huge challenge. As I mentioned, you have new arrivals coming to this country. But also think about some of the fringe groups that we actually have to go out and knock on the doors. The neo-Nazis up in Idaho, for example, or the anarchists down in Eugene, okay? The homeless, okay? There's a whole cadre, myriad of people that we have to actually go out and get the census done. And we don't care what their political affiliation or what their focus is. Our job is to count everybody once in the right place, and only once. Now, last census, great job here in Oregon. People responded extremely well. We had about a 69% return rate. We're hoping to bump that up to about 75% to 80% because all we're doing is asking 10 simple questions. And a lot of people say 10 simple questions. I can't believe that. Well, all we're asking for is name, age, date of birth, gender, race, Hispanic origin, relationship of the people in the household to each other, and is the house rented or is it owned? That's all we're asking this census. Okay, let's go back about 100 years ago to 1840 to 1880. Guess how many questions we were asking back then? About 150 to almost 175 questions back in the previous census. And my favorite question back there was the question that said, how many spinsters were in the household? And also, how many people in the household are idiotic, okay? And I was doing a lot of research on the family, and I turned around to my dad one time. I said, boy, we have a lot of idiots in the family. And of course, my mom piped in and said, all you have to do is go to a family reunion. They're thick as flies back there. Now, when you think about that, name, age, date of birth, race, Hispanic origin, relationship to the other people in the family, and is the house owner, is it rented, it's not very invasive. But you're going to hear in the news, why should I have to do this? The government doesn't have a right. Well, I tell people it is civic engagement. It is the basics and the foundation of our political system. When you think back then, that Age of Enlightenment with people like Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, it's amazing they came up with this idea, this age of reasoning, to actually say that representation was not going to be from a monarchy, but actually from the people themselves. This representation then had to go into a representative type of form of government. And it's amazing back then that they knew it was going to change from decade to decade, and that's why the number of questions on the questionnaires change. Every question that we have on the questionnaire has either been mandated or required by laws that have been passed by Congress. So when you look at the short form data or American Community Survey that we do on a monthly basis now, which is the long form data, these are required by laws. Now, the census is mandatory, but guess what? We don't sell the census that way, because what's the worst thing you can say to an American? You have to do this, okay? Because once you say that, they say, get off my porch. And they do, or they chase you off. I always make the analogy. I started with the Census Bureau about 35 years ago. I've knocked on a lot of doors, and the analogy I always say is everything is relative to where you're knocking on doors. If I'm in San Francisco or Oakland and somebody comes out with a gun, I get nervous. If I'm up in Alaska and they come out with a gun, that's just normal, the type of thing. So it's just funny how you have to gauge things around the country. Now, these simple 10 questions that we're asking, when you look at it, are not very, very invasive. And what I usually do is joke with people that you probably give more personal information to the pizza delivery guy that delivers your pizza than you are in this census. Now, one thing I want to thank Deborah about, excellent job of saying why it is so important. Well, it's important because of the following reason. $435 billion are allocated based on these census numbers. Extremely, extremely important. And also that it's safe. Every census taker takes an oath of confidentiality. They will have ID and also other material that will identify them as a census taker when they go knocking on doors. I know you're going to be shocked here. As I mentioned, we had a 69% response rate last census, but some people just don't send that census form back. So we will hire this army of census takers to go out this summer to knock on the doors because we have to make sure we get 100% count. Why? Okay? The census is about three things, and this is what I want to leave you with. It's about power. It's about money. And what I really think and why I'm so dogged and passionate about it, it's about justice. Money, of course, because of that $435 billion. $12,000 if somebody is missed. Can you imagine that? What would that effect would have for just one person in our community? Second thing, it's about power. We're on the cusp of getting another representative seat here in the state of Oregon. When you have more representatives, more power is given back to that state in the form of grants that come back to the state to pay for basic services. And finally, think of the census as this way. It is about justice. It is that yardstick, that barometer to ensure that we're giving everyone a fair shake. And when I say a fair shake, what I mean when you're looking at the Voting Rights Act of '65, when you're looking at the Community Reinvestment Act, when you're looking at the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, it allows people that fair shake, that you actually are doing things when it comes to employment, issuing loans, not so much on the merits of somebody's the color of their skin, but do they meet the qualifications for a loan for that particular mortgage, for example? Or if we're hiring in our communities, are we doing it equitably across all groups? So to me, that's one of the things I love about the census. It provides that yardstick for local governments to make sure that we have that sense of justice. So what I'm going to ask you to do today is when you're going home and you're driving home, I want you to sit there and say, oh yeah, I heard about this. The road on which I'm driving, I want you to think about the census, because there's funding that comes back for road improvement based upon population counts and the formulas that the federal government does that road system improvements and also new roads for the state of Oregon. When you go past the school and you hear about computers going into schools, think of Title I money. Guess what it's based upon? The number of school-age kids in that particular community. And then also, when you think of services to veterans, or when you see the ambulance or the fire truck zoom by you, think of the census, because that is how basic funding is getting back to your community to provide basic services that we all take for granted. So these population counts and other demographic information that we collect are used to provide that basic funding formulas for all the different programs that we have in this area. So one thing I want to say, and the final thing, is please let your voice be heard and answer the census. If you can just do one thing for us, get the word out to all your friends and relatives, but also fill out that form and send it back in the mail to us. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing locally to increase the turnout. About a year ago, Gladys Romero from the Census Bureau approached Multnomah County and the city of Portland about forming a complete count committee similar to the successful effort from 10 years ago. Commissioner Nick Fish and I agreed to co-chair the group, and we invited representatives from nonprofits, county and city employees, and Census Bureau staff together to figure out how we could count every person in our county, in our community. And I'll be honest, we got off to a little rocky start. The community members all had really great ideas about how to make this process work well, but unfortunately, most of their concerns focused on decisions that had already been made. Even though our committee had started a year in advance of this count, the major decisions about how the questions would appear on the form had already been made. For example, while the census asks whether you're married or single, it doesn't take into account domestic partnerships or civil unions. Only certain races and ethnicities are listed on the form, while everyone else is relegated to the others column. So Commissioner Fish and I decided to take a step back. We looked at what they were doing in other states, and we've decided to approach this like a campaign. Because if there's one thing two politicians know how to do, it's run a campaign. In most campaigns, your goal is to identify your most likely voters, persuade them why you are the best candidate, and then get them to vote. The strategy for this campaign is the exact opposite. We will focus some attention on increasing the general awareness of the census, remind people that it's coming, that it's easy, that it's important, and that it's safe to fill out those 10 simple questions. But to ensure that we have a truly accurate count and a truly accurate description of who is living here in our community, we are focusing the bulk of our attention on increasing participation among those who are least likely to participate. In political lingo, instead of focusing on those 4 out of 4 voters, those people that vote in every single election, we're going to focus our time and energy on people who may not even be registered to vote. This is foreign to us in this room. We are all civically engaged. When we receive our census form in the mail, we're going to send it in, right? For many people who are struggling to make ends meet, who don't have a place to call home, who don't speak English or who don't trust government, answering those 10 questions is about the farthest thing from their mind. So we decided that in order to be successful this campaign, we would have to have a personal message. And we thought the best way to do that would be to ask local, culturally specific nonprofit organizations to help us. They are trusted, they are known, and people already go to them for support. They will be the face of the census. And thanks to a great partnership with business, foundations, and the United Way, we are able to financially support their work in these tough times. I would like to invite Marc, Levy, the CEO and president of the United Way, to share a few words about how they got involved in this effort and what they're helping us to accomplish. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is really express a thank you to Deborah and Nick because of their insight and their commitment. And as you heard, the direction that we're trying to go as a community to really understand the challenges that we face to really have a complete count. And that's the goal. The goal would be that 100% of our folks, everybody, gets counted, because that's really what it takes for us as a community. And so when I was approached with the idea of what was going on, it was very clear that this is not only important, it's vital to all of us to be able to do this. And absolutely, we were willing to step up and say that we would help not only by putting some dollars on the table, but we'd help to make sure that the dollars that are raised, 100% of those dollars are going to be able to be used to be able to help with the count. And that's really what our role was to help to kind of make sure that those dollars got out there quickly to the organizations that were identified and to be able to do that. But the reason is and I'd say to you, is that I have to tell you, I've been through this a couple times, and every year, every time you go through this, you realize the challenges that it takes to be able to really bring people together to want to be counted. It sounds easy. We can even identify where the gaps are. But the reality is, in a multicultural community like we have, people that have different experiences with government and the trust or mistrust of government, the understanding of how we fit in, there are a lot of social and cultural barriers to being willing to count, to be counted, to share information, to be identified. And the awareness that we have with our leadership and our communities here, to be able to step up and understand that and make that a part of the process is fantastic. We're not the only place that's doing this, but the strategy that we're using, I think, is fairly unique compared to other communities. And that is understanding that what we did is we identified some dollars to be able to contract with organizations that already have the relationships in those segments of our community to reach out, to strengthen the trust, and encourage people to be part of this. I'd like to tell you that you heard the why. I'm going to tell you a very practical why, and it's not just about the data, on the singular level of what it means for a single organization, whether it be a hospital or the United Way. It's the ability for us to have information that allows all of us to talk with each other about this information and to think and talk as a community, understanding who's here. And there's a synergy that occurs because it allows us to begin to not only be focused on the money, which is very important, but the other part of that, how do we align those dollars to make the most significant difference in our community? And that, to me, is, again, why it was so important for us to work together on this. And so I want to just say that this is just a fantastic effort that's going on, and that there, as they've mentioned, California, Massachusetts, there's other places that are also a part of this process in their own communities. Because everybody, I think, is understanding, especially during these tough economic times, why leave dollars on the table? We need those resources to be able to provide services and programs in our community. We did bring together businesses and foundations, and we asked them for their financial support. We asked them to recognize that there was a short time frame, so please, could you maybe if you needed to, go outside your normal way of considering this? And we got almost 100% support from those that we approached. I'd like to right now just take a minute and really publicly thank the businesses and foundations and ask any of those organizations that might be here to stand up. The City of Portland, Oregon Community Foundation, Providence of Portland, Collins Foundation, Penny Family Fund, the United Way, Kaiser Permanente, Metro Multifamily Housing Association, Northwest Health Foundation, The Standard, Bank of America, Nike, PGE, Legacy Health Systems, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, Comcast, Equity Foundation. I think if you hear and listen to the list of all the organizations that we have, it shows the broad support and the willingness. I want to add that beyond making a financial commitment, Comcast donated the production and airtime for a public service announcement that's going to start running in a few weeks. And it really features Jared Bayless from the Trailblazers, and it's going to be running during the months of March and April, right?
There's a really important one.
Pardon? Okay. And it's going to allow us to begin to really carry the message out right when these begin to hit and come into the homes, so people hopefully will fill them out. But the reality is that there's an awareness part to this whole effort. Now, the Complete Count Committee, with the support of United Way, started off targeting on 7 communities: the African American, the African, Native American, Asian Pacific Islanders, immigrants, and refugees, Latino, and people experiencing homelessness. And they invited applications from 17 organizations to apply. 14 of those organizations submitted very creative, collaborative proposals, unique to their communities, targeted and being very strategic and intentional about what they could do to be able to help with this. Additional funds were raised after the grant announcements, and so we also invited organizations serving seniors and those with disabilities to submit applications. So we began to really recognize that we needed to really reach out again to the full diversity of our community. I want to give some examples. I'm going to identify the organizations that got funded, but also just to give an example of the kind of diverse strategies that these organizations are really put together. Africa House, the African Women's Coalition, and the Center for Intercultural Organizing are working with African-owned businesses to reach out to customers, and they're creating some how-to DVDs in 10 languages, again, to reach out into the community. Self-Enhancement Incorporated, Oregon Action, and Urban League are reaching community members through community-owned businesses, parents of kids and after-school programs, and churches to deliver the census message from the pulpit. Again, trying to reach out to those segments of the community. The Asian Family Center, Asian Health and Health Services Center are doing outreach right now during the Lunar New Year celebration, and they're also going to be mailing information. Again, focusing in on households, really on the importance of participating, and it's happening in multiple languages. El Programa Hispano, Latino Network, and Hacienda CDC are hosting 3 fiestas throughout the county to help people fill out their forms. In the Native American community, NAYA is hiring a team of interns to do community presentations. NARA is hosting a health and census fair, and will have questionnaire assistance centers at all of their 7 service centers. Again, reaching out to the segments of the community. JOIN, Janus Youth Services, and Impact Northwest are training organizations who work with people who are homeless how to get counted. And again, part of the challenge is because most of our work is really based on home-centered. For those that are homeless, it's an additional challenge to be able to reach out to that segment of the community. And again, to try to do what Michael's talking about, everybody gets counted. ERCO, the Russian Oregon Social Services, and Catholic Charities are going door to door and working with churches to engage recent immigrants and refugees. Elders in Action and ARC of Multnomah County are reaching seniors and clients through their service-based outreach to help assist in the filling out of forms. Again, make it easy to be able to participate. Make it easy to be able to give that information. I want to thank, again, I would like to thank all those organizations that are willing to step up, because this is a major effort. The money that's being put on the table is not really paying for this effort. It's just helping to be able to do that. So I'd like to thank all those organizations. Ultimately, we're all taking a leap of faith. What we're doing is we're putting effort into being able to increase the likelihood of a count. And again, I'm going to reinforce on another way what you've heard Deborah was talking about in terms of what this really means in terms of dollars to our community. But I want to challenge all of you. I'm going to ask each of you to be willing to give half an hour of your time to reach out to 10 people who probably aren't going to be counted. Or if you're in an organization, get the message out to your organization that you're hearing today and encourage them to do that. Think about that. If what we're talking about is that for every, you said for every 10 people, that's $12,000. Think about it if we multiply out what that means if every one of us, if you all take a half an hour and reach 10 people, this will be the most profitable lunch that you've had. Together, there's 250 people here. If we all do that, this will be the most profitable lunch that we've had as a community. Think about what that means, because it can mean $38 to $40 million. That's what it means if we all are able to do that. And take a half an hour, get the message out, be champions for that, because it's not going to happen just by the complete count committee. It's not going to happen just by these organizations. It's going to happen by the fact that as a community, we're committed to wanting to make sure that everybody gets counted and that we as a community are represented and that we're able to access those resources, because it's going to make a difference right here in our community, in our state, and make a difference for the people that we know, we love, and we care. So again, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank Deborah and Nick for the leadership, because it's so important for all of us what we're doing right now. Thank you.
The first question, as always, will be from our City Club host. Our host today is Tom Cox. Tom is owner of a management consulting firm specializing in improving the productivity of technology in teams by imparting leadership skills. Tom has been a City Club member since 2003 and is active on the Board of Governors and the Governance Committee. Tom?
Thank you, Sue. The trivia buffs in the room know that I once ran for governor, and in that race I questioned in a debate in Eugene the methodology by which the hunger was calculated in the state of Oregon. I was solemnly informed that this meant that I wanted people to be hungry. There's a bit of a bias at work when we count the needy, because any error that might underreport is an error worth fixing. It makes you a virtuous person to fix it. But if you notice an error that you think maybe might overstate things, you better keep your mouth shut. And the stakes here are $12,000 over the next 10 years for every person that we miss. We don't want to miss anyone. But there's another $12,000 available if a well-meaning person, not here in Portland because we're all good government types, but maybe in some other community, for every imaginary person we slip in, there's another $12,000 for us. What are the safeguards in place to prevent that kind of thing from happening so that we can maintain the trust that we need in the very well-regarded work of the census?
Could you get a little bit more specific for me? You were asking about safeguards
I'm
for
worried about
double counting?
The potential for overcounting or
Oh, okay.
over-reporting of any kind.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is after the census is over, we actually do a very detailed survey. In statistics, it's called the dual system estimation approach. Independently from the census, we actually go out and do what we do. It's called a capture-recapture methodology. And have you ever seen nature shows that say, well, the number of bears in this preserve is X, like 150? Well, how do they do that? They don't go out and actually capture 150 bears in the preserve. What they actually do is get a number of bears, they tag them, and they put them back out into the forest preserve. And if you come very close with mathematical statistics, you can actually estimate what the count is for that particular area. Same thing we do in the census, except that we don't tag people because people will get a little upset if we started to tag them. But what we actually do is we go back to households independently and we compare what we get in the census versus on the survey that we do. And that's how we develop what we call the overcount or the undercount estimates for how accurate the census is. Second thing we do is that if we're looking at snowbirds that go away and they actually say, I live over here in Portland, but then I'm also down in Phoenix, we will actually, at a processing center, get those two questionnaires and see what they have answered. With the Census Bureau is where I spend most of the time of the year is where I'm supposed to be counted. So we will actually see that, and then we will count them in the correct location. For the homeless, we actually do a comparison of we call them individual census reports, when we actually go out face-to-face and we collect information for people in shelters, in soup kitchens, and also in outdoor locations. We will do comparisons of that. So if I counted Mike Burns in a shelter on the 29th of March, when we do the shelter count, and then I also count Mike Burns at a soup kitchen, and then again also at a Target of Nights location on the 31st of March, we will compare those and actually see, is this the same person? If we do have 3 census forms that come back for that person, we will only count that person once.
We will now take questions from the floor. Asking questions is a privilege of City Club membership. When you ask your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less.
I'm Barnes Ellis, and I'm a member of the club. And I want to ask this to Mr. Burns. I noted in your comments that you said the first census was 1790, and you said it was done by Jefferson. And I think you're right, but I point out that Jefferson was not president. Washington was president. I thought I read about a year ago that the current administration wanted to take the Bureau of Census out of the Commerce Department and put it directly under the White House. Did that happen? And whether or not that happened, what assurance can you give us, not about undercounting here, but overcounting elsewhere, driven by politics?
Politics. I'm glad you asked that question. The Census Bureau is completely apolitical, and there was a movement afoot about a year and a half ago to actually put the Census Bureau under the White House. What came out of that was that apolitical nature of the census, and at that time, the White House backed away from it. So we're still part of the Department of Commerce. We've been part of the Department of Commerce since, I think, the late 1800s, 1880s. Okay. Also, when you talk about Washington was president at the time, but the person in charge of the census was Thomas Jefferson. And I think it's kind of funny back then that even Washington said to Jefferson after the census was over, I think we were undercounted. And, okay. Okay, so this undercounted, overcount thing has always been historically a problem throughout the whole census. Where we started to measure it was back in 1940, because during the war, what we actually noticed was a lot of Hispanic and African Americans were volunteering to go into service for World War II. And what happened was that we noticed that from the census counts, we were expecting so many young men of this particular age to come out and volunteer for the war or be drafted into the war, and it was about 10% higher than what the census had counted. So this is one of the reasons that we spend so much time getting out to the community, that it's so important, the people who are on the fringes of society, so that we can get that accurate count.
Bob Geary, member. My question is about the incarcerated, obviously the prisoners, and then the other group who are in assisted living, locked up in areas that sometimes are referred to as for the people with dementia. Do you have a strategy to count the incarcerated?
The incarcerated, we actually go out to the prisons and actually do an enumeration of the people in the prison. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is remember the residency rule is where those people actually live. So when we go into a prison, the local area, the city in which that prison is going to get the count for that population for their particular city. It's causing a lot of controversy, every census it does, because a lot of people say, no, we should actually have them tabulated to where they came from before they were incarcerated. But with the Census Bureau is where somebody actually resides.
And those with dementia?
Well, those with dementia, we actually have a special project program, operation, where we actually go out and do an enumeration at nursing homes. It's basically between March 22nd and the end of April that we actually go out to all the nursing homes, the dormitories, campgrounds, and we actually do the enumeration of anybody living there.
Paul Milius, City Club member and census employee, proud to say. I've worked in the census now for a couple of months, and there's been work being done on this census for over a year in advance of my joining them. Can you give us some idea of the kinds of planning and so on that has gone into these efforts so far to identify households and all of the things you've done to gather the advanced data that we need?
Well, let's go ahead and put it into economics. What we do is make sure we do a mail-out, mail-back census for about 85% of the people in this country. It costs us about $2.40 to about $2.50 to mail something out to somebody and actually have them filled out and send it back. Last year, we actually went out through every nook and cranny in the state of Oregon, and we listed every housing unit that was out there. What we collected was their mailing address and also the XY coordinates of where that particular house sits on the ground for redistricting data, because you actually have to tabulate people to where they physically live on the ground. So we have everyone's address, and what we do is the post office will deliver in the state of Oregon about 85% of the housing units to 90%. There's about 10% where the post office does not have a good mailable address in that particular area, or people receive their mail at a P.O. box. We actually have census takers go out and hand deliver that particular census form to their house.
I'm Elsa Porter, City Club member. I was engaged in the administration of the 1980 census, and the estimate of cost per person to take the 1980 census was astonishingly $4 per person. Do you have an estimate of what the cost per person is
I don't have an estimate
today?
of the exact cost per person, but it is, each census, it almost doubles the amount of money that takes to actually do a census. Constitutionally, we are mandated to count everybody in the country. This census will be about $14 billion for the country.
Thank you.
Okay.
Joe Sixtus, City Club member. I'm wondering, are there states that typically undercount or overcount their populations within the U.S.? And how does the U.S. Census methodology compare with other countries' census taking?
Okay, well, first of all, with each state, the Census Bureau does the census throughout the whole country. A lot of good reasons for that, okay? Number one is comparability of data. So if I'm in Key West, I can use the census data and I can compare it against Nome, Alaska. We do not let the states get involved in the actual tabulation of the data or the collection of the data. That's something we've been doing for 220 years, and we do a fairly good job of doing that. So what we do is ask the states to join us in complete count committees, and the state here has been fantastic. We have about 350 complete count committees throughout the state. Now, when you compare us against other countries, I think it's funny because in some countries, they actually do a census day, and they tell everybody to stay at home. The census takers are going to be there for that particular day. They use government workers and they use teachers. And what we actually find out, to give you some example, in Mexico, that's the way they do it. People stay home. Well, the Italians try to do the same thing, and if you know the Italians, they told everybody to stay home. They said, they can't tell me to stay home, so everybody went outside. So they had a real tough time doing their census. When you look at other communities, such as France and Germany, they actually, and also Italy, they also have like an ID for each person in their country. Iceland, for example, the Scandinavian countries. We don't do that in this country here, and that's one of the reasons why we have to go out. Even in their countries, though, they have a lot of hidden population that goes uncounted. For example, the Roma or the Gypsies that migrate through different European countries are very difficult to count over in Europe. When you compare some of the things I thought was interesting, back in the 1950s, when Stalin did a census in Russia, I thought it was pretty humorous because the Russian demographers had to come over to our Census Bureau. Somehow we got a copy of their census because the Russian demographers at the time, back in I think it was about 1980, could not get access to their own census data. Our census data is right out there. You can go to www.census.gov, and this is one of the things that's nice too, the availability of data to local people at the local level, regardless of how much money you have, or our data are free. So you can just go in and do downloads. Again, it's aggregated data. Your personal information will not be shown, okay, nor do we share it with any other government agency. We've been taken to the Supreme Court, and they have always upheld us. It's one of the reasons we get such excellent response from the general community. Okay.
Sal Kadri, member. This is for Deborah. Deborah, there are 16,000 prisoners in Oregon. Would it solve the county's financial problems if we were to move them all to the Multnomah County?
That's a great idea. We'll look into that, so I'll get back to you.
How do you follow that? My name is Stephanie Vardavis, and I'm a City Club member, and I'd like to know if you would be willing to talk a little bit, Mr. Burns, about the decision-making process that led to the abandonment of the long-form census form, because, you know, in 1980, I remember filling it out and just thinking it was really interesting, and there were a ton of questions in there that I personally would have loved to know the answers to about my country, and I'd like to know a little bit about how you guys moved away from that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. In the previous censuses, we had a long-form census and a short-form census. About 1 in every 6 households received that long form on the average. That was the thing that you heard a lot of controversy from the media. People would be interviewed and say, why do the Census Bureau has to know all this information? One of the problems of collecting long form data, as we did in the previous censuses, is that the data become very, very old within 1 or 2 years. So what we actually did was we took the long form census out of the regular census. It's still part of the census. We call it the American Community Survey. And every month we go out, and every year and interview about 2.5% of all the housing units in every county in the country. What actually it produces for us then is that long-form data that everybody so much depends upon if you're doing grant writing. So it's still there. The thing that I like about it, it's more timely now because it's refreshed every year instead of waiting for 10 years for your long-form data. Plus, it's a good indices because we use that. We use the census as the benchmark, and then these other surveys that come on, the population estimates that the state of Oregon does, and also what the Census Bureau does, between that 10-year period using the American Community Survey becomes far more accurate.
Ginny Cornyn, City Club member. I first want to commend the local committee for the collaboration and cooperation in your approach to counting, but I can still envision, I work as a CASA, I'm involved with transition projects and several other projects in the area. I can still envision some of that population not actually getting reached. Is there a way of working with DHS or working with Head Start programs and other kinds of programs that touch people that those community organizations may miss as well, who are still flying under the radar in terms of registration?
Thanks, that's a great question. And we do have, we didn't mention every member of our Complete Count Committee, but we do have members from all walks of life. And there is a Complete Count Committee at the state level too that reaches out to all the state agencies and therefore all the local community agencies that are funded by the state. So we're doing our best. I also do want to mention that we have here in Multnomah County to be counted sites all over the place, and we've targeted a lot of places where people go, spend a lot of time. For example, at all the Multnomah County libraries, there will be folks there to help. And you can find out more information on our census website, which of course I can't remember the address to right off the top of my head, but I'll find it and get back to you.
And if I can add one other thing too, it's great now that we have the internet. One of the things that we're producing is what we call questionnaire assistance centers and be counted sites. And if you ever used Google Maps, it's the same type of application we're using. If you're trying to find a restaurant, we will actually have where these questionnaire assistance centers are throughout the whole city and county of Multnomah County, and also every county in Oregon. So you can actually click it on, it would actually say when the hours of operation and also the languages that are spoken at that particular questionnaire assistance center. The other thing that we're providing to complete count committees today, which is really, I think, a vast improvement from previous censuses, is that you can actually go in starting around the 22nd of March and look at the mail response rate, not only at the state level or the county level or the city level, but right down to a neighborhood. So with the complete count committees, they could actually look at, okay, we need to do something as the census is being completed to get the word out. And the same thing with our partnership staff. And I've been very remiss. Gladys, would you like to stand up? Gladys is one of our chief people who works on our partnership services staff. She has been fantastic. I've known Gladys now for 2 censuses, and when we started up this next census, I gave her a call and said, come on, it's time to come back. She does an excellent job with migrant communities, migrant worker communities.
I've got the website address. It's www.pdxcensus2010.org. So if anybody would like more information about what we're doing in our local community, we have a website as of March 1st. Thank you.
Hi, I'm representing the African Women's Coalition, and we're also one of the grantees for the census. And I'm looking at the form right now, and it lists all of the Latin countries of origin, the Asian countries of origin. How should we instruct our members and the people in our outreach how to fill out the form if they're from an African country?
From an African country, we get this often. One of the things, when we developed the questionnaire, the questions were put into cement about 5 years ago. The Congress actually then blesses it and say, okay, this is what we're going to collect because it's actually to support different government programs. One of the things that we are doing is trying to get the word out and asking people to look at that. When you look at race, it is what I feel I am. So we ask people to see if the category that says African American, Black, if that is something that qualifies for that person if they feel they are African American or black. If they're not, they still have the opportunity in the other box to actually put on the questionnaire what they consider themselves. So when you look at our race categories, okay, it's not so much biologically based, it's what I feel I am. Plus, starting last census, we actually allow people to put multiple race on the questionnaire. The other category too, you get lots of different responses. My favorites are the ones that say blue, green, orange, or the one that I always get a kick out of, which says none of your business. I worked in a processing center in 1980. It says none of your business, NYOB, or my ever favorite one, MOYFB, okay? So it's amazing what people put on their census questionnaire.
Well, will it be in the future to list as other countries are listed?
And I think what's going to happen is the planning for the 2020 census is already underway, and I think that you will see a change for the next census.
We've run out of time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for this week. Please join us on March 5th when education reporter Betsy Hammond from the Oregonian will ask Superintendent Carol Smith to answer questions about the proposed high school redesign. As we close, please join me in expressing our appreciation to today's speakers, Deborah Kafoury, Michael Burns, and Marc Levy. We're adjourned.